started because I know there's several students here today, which is great. Some of you, I understand, have class at 5:10. That's a common thing. So if you do have to leave, just try to be polite about it. But I think there'll be a break, and then we'll start taking questions. So that might be a natural time to kind of, if you have class. But I want to just introduce our talk today and thank you for everyone for coming. I'm really excited to see everybody here. And this event was inspired by the broader dialogue the Center for the Humanities and the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship Project held over the course of this year on campus called The State of the Humanities, Humanities and the State, that focused on examining the state of the humanities in society today and the role of the humanities in the public good. And as I listened to this dialogue, I began to think just how very clear the looting and destruction of cultural heritage sites in Syria and Iraq occurring right now makes the importance of the humanities to society today. Here's an example where kind of the import of humanities that we all can talk about in social sciences is made really raw and material and tangible, and I have been promised it'll be really manifest at a scale that is really shocking. If the humanities, culture, art, archaeology, history, literature did not matter in a fundamental way to society, then ISIS would not be taking time from their war efforts to purposefully and publicly display the destruction of it. It is many in archaeology syllabi that quote George Orwell's 1984 when he writes, "Who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past." Well, verging on cliche, as I think we will include this in our syllabi or our first day lecture, it actually resonates something very real. Indeed, we see over time as new regimes and kind of ideologies rise, particularly regimes and ideologies focused on establishing a kind of homogenous worldview, they manipulate in various ways the past for their own specific ends. Take the Nazi Party. Instead of destroying sites, as we're going to see with ISIS, they actually expended notable effort to falsify their archaeological record for their own end, making fake artifacts and even entire fake sites to prove the historical and so unquestionable supremacy of the Aryan race. Cultural heritage provides, among other things, grounding and authenticity. And when a group is able to tie itself to that authentic heritage and erase others' ties to it and other narratives about the past, they indeed can come to control the future. In a recent Guardian article, a local resident who fled Mosul in Iraq, where ISIS destroyed a newly refurnished museum quite publicly, he said, quote, "ISIS are trying to destroy our collective memory. This is worse than Mao, and it is worse than Pol Pot. It is the worst kind of cultural revolution. They want people to know that nothing was important before them." So I'm really excited today. We have the opportunity to hear from experts at ASOR Syrian Heritage Initiative, Dr. Michael Dante, the Director for Cultural Heritage Communications, and Dr. Andrew Vaughn, the Program Director, about their internationally collaborative efforts to respond to the destruction, efforts that will help make sure people in Syria and Iraq, but also across the world, continue to know just how much important came before ISIS and will certainly come after. I thank them very much for coming. Each of these scholars brings years of experience in the cultural heritage of the Middle East, and I'm excited to hear them share their work. And after their presentation, I'll welcome some colleagues from UNH's Middle Eastern Studies minor to join them up here in the front to provide some of their thoughts and experiences and perspectives and to engage in an active discussion with everybody. And I thank my colleagues in the Center for the Humanities, the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship Project, the Sustainability Institute, the Middle Eastern Studies minor, and the Anthropology Department for making this event possible. With a special thanks she owes to Katie Owens for doing a lot of the logistical organizing for me, so thank you very much. I didn't realize how much work it is to organize an event on kind of short notice, so I just need to give her a special thanks. But welcome our speakers, appreciate it, so thank you.
So I'm going to speak first. I'm going to try to limit my comments to about 5 minutes to give you the background of the project and why ASOR started this project. Michael, Professor Dante is one of the PIs, and he's the one who really is responsible for the research here, so I want to leave most of the time there. First of all, what is an ASOR? ASOR stands for the American Schools of Oriental Research. We've been around for 115 years. We have 1,600 members. Most of them are professors and people who teach classics, history, and archaeology. So rather than being discipline-based, we're people who teach in the Eastern Mediterranean. So you can think of it as Cyprus all the way to Afghanistan. We also have about 10,000 friends. One of the things I was telling Professor Dante I really was bummed is I had a stack of cards to encourage you all to become friends. But if you go to the ASOR website, you can click on Become a Friend. And the nice thing is you can become a friend for free. And you get a monthly e-newsletter that we put out that updates you on not only cultural heritage, but on history in the Eastern Mediterranean. We hold an annual meeting, we publish some journals, we publish site reports. In short, we support what our members do. So why is that related to this talk? Last April, or really it was in March, so about this time, the U.S. Department of State put out an RFP, a request for proposal, for groups to put together a team who would do cultural heritage work on planning for reconstruction in Syria in a post-conflict time. It was actually a time where there was some hope that the conflict would wind down, the opposition group would come into control over much of the country, and the U.S. State Department wanted to play a leading role in the international community developing plans for the future. So last April, about this time, we started to put together our team or our proposal. ASOR is an international organization of scholars, and so our goal is not to support our own organization, but to support the work of our membership. So we were, I think, an ideal organization to bring together people from all around the world to have an international coalition. And I'll speak to that in a minute, but that's why we put the proposal together. Immediately when the project was announced in early July, one of the first comments that came up on Facebook was, why would you undertake a heritage project during a humanitarian crisis? And I think it's a very good question. And indeed, the humanitarian crisis deserves our full attention, and we certainly support the work of the Red Cross and other humanitarian groups. However, ASOR and scholars do cultural heritage work, and we felt we had something to contribute. We're not saying it's as important or more important than those other humanitarian efforts, but we feel that it's an important piece of the international response that people in Syria and Iraq need to see. As stated on the slide, we feel that cultural heritage is inextricably connected to cultural and national identity. The conflicts in Syria and Iraq include overt efforts, and ISIL is one of those groups who are making these efforts to change cultural identity and even attempts at ethnic cleansing. So whatever one's position, we feel that cultural heritage must be part of the reconstruction and rebuilding effort. It's part of the humanitarian effort now, and we feel in the future that it may be one of the key components to a successful reconstruction or rebuilding in a period of stabilization. And I use the term stabilization because I'm not sure when we're going to see peace. So that's why we decided as an organization to submit the RFP. And what I want to highlight here is not read out all of the names, but to show that we have Syrians, we have colleagues from Canada, we have colleagues from France, England, Lebanon, Germany. You'll see the list of all of the people who are involved. In the proposal that we submitted to the Department of State, we said if we can stand a chance of being successful, this project needs to be seen as an international response to the cultural heritage crisis and not the United States going it alone. So we're very humbled that all of these scholars came together. Some of them are employed by us now through this grant funding. Most of them are working as volunteers. But we've put together an international coalition working with other international groups. The German Archaeological Association, there's a group in England, a group in France, and a group in Canada, are all partnering with us. And even some of the other people who submitted competitive bids are now working with us and volunteering their time. We have important and strong support from the Getty Conservation Institute and the World Monuments Fund. So what do? There are 3 goals or parts of our project. We document document damage. That's done through weekly reports. I think Professor Dante will show you some of the weekly reports. If you go to the website here right at the top, each week there's a weekly report that varies from 40 to 150 pages.
Yeah.
I think the one, when it goes up, there's a lag time before they're posted. The one from this week's going to be a 150-page report. So we have, I think, 6 people working on these weekly reports. Professor Dante is the one in charge of this group. There's a heritage timeline that's a part of those weekly reports. If you go to the website, you'll see there are links to all of the places on the web where you can find these incidents. We also have a team of about 3 or 4 full-time equivalent people working on geospatial and satellite analysis. And they're analyzing satellite imagery, helping with the weekly reporting, also helping with mapping of sites. Once all of these things come together, the weekly report is partly to promote global awareness. Professor Dante and others are quoted in the New York Times and Washington Post and CBS News and NBC. We're trying to let people know that the magnitude of the damage and intentional acts of destruction that are taking place. This all leads to planning for emergency and post-war responses. And some people have asked, why are we planning for those responses now when things are still being destroyed? The documentation portion is very important, so we will have an idea of the scope and magnitude of the crisis once there is this period of stabilization. And it's our hope that we can play a piece, not the only piece, but a key role in mobilizing the international community of scholars. Because our goal is that the international community of scholars can get together and help the international governments, once there is this period of stabilization, in knowing how we can respond. So what we've tried to show here is that while these are our 3 goals, they really circle back on each other. And as we develop more plans, it helps us know what we need to document. And this global awareness piece, I think, is key, which is one reason we're here today. We're really pleased that you're, as a university and as a group of students, caring about this issue. And I think letting not only people in the United States, but internationally, know the importance of this cultural heritage damage is critical. And I think it's also critical that the peoples of Iraq and Syria see that the world cares about them as people, cares about their culture, and not just about the economic commodities that they might possess. So that's the reason that we got involved in this, and Professor Dante is going to show you more of the academic program side of what we do.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. So on a weekly basis, my primary activity on the project as an archaeologist is to produce the weekly reports for the Department of State. Before this project started, from 1991 to 2010, I was an archaeologist working in Syria, and I also worked in Western Iran. In 2010, I made the decision to stop the Boston University excavations that I was conducting in Raqqa province in Syria. As you all probably know, Raqqa is now the capital of Islamic State. The city where I worked for 20 years essentially is the capital. The village where I worked is occupied by Islamic State militants on the Euphrates Valley. Worked at an early Bronze Age site studying ancient Mesopotamia. I moved to working in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I now work in the northeastern part of Iraqi Kurdistan on the Iranian border. My wife and I sometimes joke that the next stop for me will be the archaeology of North Korea. Not so funny in some ways. In terms of international heritage now, which is what I've been doing since 2012, the word on the street is we are really challenged now to keep up with the international heritage situation. I attend Blue Shield meetings and UNESCO meetings, and everywhere that I go, talking with other heritage experts, the words are things like exhaustion from the international heritage community, a lack of capacity to deal with our present challenges, and the psychological impact of all of these crises on people who are trying to save heritage. We have appalling destructions, intentional destructions of heritage in Mali, where we see medieval manuscripts being burned by Islamist militants. The destruction of Sufi shrines. Sufism is a subset of Islam. It's a mystical branch of Islam. Sufism is under attack across all of the Middle East and North Africa. Sufi shrines, mosques, tombs, guest houses are being destroyed by extremists. You'll see more of that for Iraq and Syria shortly. For this example from Libya. And even in Ukraine there are currently over 600 cultural sites that are at risk in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. We see intentional destructions of heritage places, libraries, university collections, museums. The Ukraine itself can easily stretch international capacity. So, turning to Syria, which is how this project started, what we see in Syria on a weekly basis, and I'm going to show you some things from our recent weekly reporting. On a weekly basis, we see antiquities on the market in Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. Large numbers of antiquities, some of them very high value. We see appalling, deliberate destructions of heritage places. Sometimes local sources simply give us numbers. 5, 10, 15 sites in this particular province were destroyed by ISIL this week or this month. They don't even give us a list of the individual sites. There are so many. We see combat damage, and we see the neglect of cultural sites because of the degradation of cultural capacity. We see farmers plowing up archaeological sites because there's no monitoring. There are no conservators or preservation specialists that are able to get out into the field and to preserve the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Syria. So 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Militarization. Excavations of archaeological mounds in Syria and Iraq for tank traps, rifle pits. Archaeological sites that are becoming minefields because they represent the high ground at important geographic points along highways. Blue Shield and other organizations are trying to make a difference, UNESCO, Blue Shield, but there are a lot of problems. In Syria and Iraq, sites marked with the Blue Shield should protect cultural sites. This was an idea that came out of World War II. But instead, Blue Shield sites are used to store munitions. This is something that dates back to the First War in Iraq, where locals take advantage of the Blue Shield and they actually use those as bases for extremists, or munitions and other weapons are stored there. Our project is often likened to the monuments men, monuments women. The people that work for us in Syria and Iraq are called monuments men and women in the media. Sometimes this annoys me a little bit. First of all, the people that are doing the work for us in country are very brave men and women who are Iraqis and Syrians. Americans are not going into Syria and Iraq to conduct this work, and things have changed a lot, and I didn't like this movie very much. I love the book. But the situation has changed, but one of the things that we're coping with, besides exhaustion, a lack of capacity, is that much of the cultural heritage legislation that's out there internationally, much of the capacity that we have was developed off of the damage that occurred in World War II. The Hague Convention, for example, from 1954. At Blue Shield last year, when I attended Blue Shield in Holland, at UNESCO meetings, people are talking about the fact that most of the legislation and treaties that we have are outdated. They're developed for state versus state warfare, and as we know, for Iraq and Syria, that is simply not the case. This is not the monument situation. This is the map currently of what Iraq and Syria look like. It doesn't matter what these colors are. This is the situation on the ground. You have the Syrian regime in light pink, and in green in Syria on your left. Those are the areas that are controlled by coalitions of the opposition, Muslim extremists, and then yellow is Kurdish factions across the top. Gray represents the so-called Islamic State, or Daesh, ISIL. Down at the bottom, what I'll call magenta, is the government of Iraq. It's a little bit different these days. Many of the actors embedded within this map are non-state. They're non-state actors. They do not abide by international treaty or law. And we also have proxy forces on the ground from Lebanon, Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. It's an extremely complex situation. Most of my time, since July, I was in Kurdistan when this started to happen. I was in Kurdistan when Islamic State expanded out of Al-Anbar province, took over Mosul, and then moved into Syria. And that's one of the biggest changes since our project was put in place, was Islamic State's expansion, their expanding footprint. And that's changed everything for us on the ground. They are the largest non-state actor involved in the conflict, and as a jihadi Salafist group, they are actively engaged in a war on culture and cultural diversity. If you question that, you only need to look at their glossy English magazine, Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q, and they spell it out for you month by month. It is now in its 8th edition. It's published in something like 13 different languages: Urdu, English, German, Dutch, Arabic. The most recent version of their magazine, Volume 8, is dedicated to their intentional destructions at the Mosul Museum and destruction at the site of Nineveh, just outside of Mosul, the Neo-Assyrian capital, in which they brag about intentional destructions and justify them through the use of quotes from the Quran and the Sunnah. So the situation in Iraq. Iraq is different than Syria. I spend a lot of time reporting on Iraq now. That was added to our project early on because of ISIL's expanding footprint, and it is a story of performative deliberate destructions. What is a performative deliberate destruction? A deliberate destruction is fairly obvious, but when it's performative, it means it's planned and it's filmed. It's photographed. So what we see ISIL doing and other jihadi Salafist groups is they plan these destructions. They arrive at the site with cameramen in tow. And sometimes locals try to prevent the destruction, but they wait them out most times. Then they set up the cameras. Religious figures give a speech. If they're destroying a heritage place, they bring out portable material culture. And they give a speech as to why that particular material culture and this particular heritage place, mosques, shrines, tombs, churches, are considered shirk, S-H-I-R-K, shirk in Arabic. Things that are shirk are idolatrous or are considered to be polytheistic. And so this is a word you'll hear Islamic State using constantly in their videos, shirk, 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 that this is shirk. So these are things that they are obligated as Salafists to destroy. They will also refer to things as being bida'ah or bidayah, which means they're innovative. There are Muslim sites or Muslim heritage that are innovative, but when they use this term bida'ah, they mean that they're actually heresy. They're not, to their mind, a pure form of Islam. They're examples of Shiaism or Sufism or other branches of Islam that they want to stamp out. And that's what they're up to with this. So in terms of most recently, we have about 75 of these deliberate destructions in Iraq. They mostly target Shia material culture, and in Western media, that's frequently not featured. In the West, we tend to focus on that 3% slab, which is pre-Islamic material culture. Archaeological sites like Nineveh or the Mosul Museum. That gets a lot of more attention. ISIL knows that, and that's why they target those sites, because they know that it affects the far enemy, the West, or Rome as they call us in their propaganda. But on most days, what I'm reporting on is the destruction of Islamic heritage, Shia heritage, Sufi heritage, and this is done for a number of different reasons, but obviously in Iraq, what they're after is they're trying to increase sectarian tensions and expand this into what they want, which is a World War III within the Middle East. Essentially, bring Iran into the conflict, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and have this evolve into a war between the Sunni and the Shia. Some Christian heritage is destroyed, Yazidi heritage. With the targeting of Yazidi heritage, particular religious minority in Iraq, and Sufism, this is also a way to target Kurds. So a lot of times we see them targeting as Syrian Christians or Kurdish groups. This is also a way to conduct ethnic cleansing and also to instill fear in their enemies when they destroy these heritage sites, churches, shrines, mosques, tombs. It instills fear into ethnic and religious minorities, and they flee into neighboring regions, and that increases the humanitarian crisis for ISIL's enemies, Turkey and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So some examples of these destructions that featured prominently in Western media: the shrine at Nebi Yunus, or for the prophet Jonah, in satellite imagery before and after. This was a site that was heavily reconstructed by Saddam Hussein. Its historical significance is questionable. It was really redone during Saddam's time and then after the destruction. This is a classic example of a performative, deliberate destruction of a site that was sacred to Jews, Christians, Shia, Sunni, Yazidis, as the alleged burial place of Jonah. It sits on top of a Neo-Assyrian archaeological site. It's part of the great capital city of Nineveh from the 8th and 7th centuries BC. The site now has essentially been, the destruction site here has been bulldozed. Locals tried to stop the destruction. ISIL waited them out. Most of the photographs on your right come from the magazine Dabik. ISIL bragged about this destruction in their magazine. On the left, we have digital globe satellite imagery that we use on our project to verify these destructions. Most times when ISIL says they did something, they've done it. They don't say, they don't joke around about this. A site that didn't feature as prominently in Western media is the Imam Yahya ibn al-Qasim Mosque, which dates back to the 13th century. This is a highly significant architectural structure, very important in terms of the development of architecture and art in Islam. And ISIL targeted it because it was an example of shirk. It was a burial monument that was essentially, they thought that was blasphemous and inappropriate for their brand of Islam, and so they detonated it. And they filmed it, and they posted the film on YouTube. And then they put these up in their magazine in Dabik, and then they justify it with quotes straight out of the Quran. And this is how we verify it. We use Twitter, Facebook to search for Islamic State posts. Their fighters brag about these destructions. We scrape the internet for that information, then we look at satellite imagery to verify the destructions. We call our in-country sources and they tell us what's going on. Most of the times when ISIL says they've destroyed something, such as the Sheikh Ibrahim shrine in the countryside of Mosul, which was dedicated to a particular local Sufi saint. The surrounding village was named after this shrine and this Sufi saint. They've destroyed it, and we can find the photographs from the fighters, like the photograph on your right. And then we check the digital globe satellite imagery as it becomes available, and we can verify the destruction of that particular shrine. And the numbers keep racking up. Right now I'm on 75 for Iraq. The number is clearly, though, well over 100. We can't really keep up with these destructions, and it takes a while to verify them. So the situation is pretty desperate. Now recently there's been a bit of a shift where ISIL is targeting pre-Islamic material culture, and they make fun of Western media for decrying these destructions. Most recently, you've probably seen on the news destructions within the Mosul Museum. These are sculptures from the site of Hatra, which is a desert oasis site just outside of Mosul in northern Iraq that dates from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD. It's a city that was associated with the earliest Arab ethnicity in Iraq. It's famous for its sculptures in the Mosul Museum, but it's just an amazing site architecturally when you go out into the desert. ISIL first focused on destroying sculptures from Hatra in the Mosul Museum. So you've probably seen that video of them smashing up these sculptures. You may have heard that the sculptures are fakes or replicas. They are not. That was a story that was seeded out into the media. We've traced it back, but it's not true. They're actually genuine sculptures. Some of the other material in the museum that is shown in the video are casts, plaster casts, but most of the sculpture is genuine. And then in the video, they end with the deliberate destructions of colossal winged bulls called Lamassu at the gates of the city of ancient Nineveh that date back to the 7th century BC. Local residents complained to ISIL because ISIL intended to blow these up with explosives. that had been knocking people's windows out in their houses and causing some problems. So ISIL elected in the video to use drills and electric jackhammers to take apart these colossal sculptures that were discovered in 1850 by the English archaeologist Sir Austin Henry Layard, one of the first large excavations of a Neo-Assyrian capital city. They're gone. Immediately after these destructions were announced, February 26th, ISIL released the video of the Mosul Museum destructions. Rumors began to fly that other sites in northern Iraq were being destroyed or were jeopardized. And the site of Hatra, ISIL made it very clear in their video that they intended to destroy other Neo-Assyrian capital cities and other sites nearby like Hatra, which is much later in time, right? It's from the classical era. UNESCO World Heritage Site. Incredible archaeological site, a lot like Palmyra in Syria, if you know that site. So for a long time, we were investigating rumors that Hatra had been bulldozed by ISIL, Hatra had been destroyed, but the satellite imagery didn't show that. Didn't show any damage, and then last week, we got a new video. And in that video, the remains that you see here, sculpture, architectural elements, amazing classical period temples, were shown being attacked by sledgehammer-wielding ISIL militants. And they are tearing all the graven images from the building because they're ancient idols. Of course, they're not. These were not objects that were worshipped in antiquity, but they don't care. And so the fighters are shown in this new video reciting verses from the Quran and then smashing the sculptures with sledgehammers. And in some cases where they can't reach the sculptures in the upper right picture, they just shoot at them with Kalashnikovs until they destroy the sculptures. So this is now a verified destruction. This is new information. We're just reporting on this, I'm sorry to say. So that's the situation now in Iraq. And ISIL is carrying out these deliberate destructions pretty much on a daily basis. Churches, shrines, mosques, tombs, and some pre-Islamic culture. But for the most part, they're targeting Islam, right? Because what distinguishes ISIL from Al-Qaeda is that they believe they have to purify Islam first before they move out from the Middle East to conquer other areas. And that's how they're different from Al-Qaeda. In Syria, as you can see, we're at actually well over 500 heritage incidents right now. This is an old number from February. I'm at about 520 heritage incidents since last July. The primary culprits in Syria are looting and excavation that may not be for antiquities, what we call digging, but antiquities get churned up. Military excavation, farming goes under digging. And we have combat damage, illegal construction, deliberate destructions, which we've talked about, vandalism, what have you, and then note tunnel bombing down at the end. So that's how damage works. Obviously, this is the frequency of attacks on heritage in Syria, but this does not measure impact. In terms of impacts, combat, deliberate destruction, and tunnel bombs do have the most impact on heritage places. Looting, while it's the most frequent activity, ranges from the industrial looting of entire ancient cities with bulldozers where the ancient remains are being completely removed, hectares after hectares. A hectare is about 2.5 acres. Or just somebody going out in back of their house or tent and putting some holes in the ground to look for a few figurines or coins. Or metal detecting on classical period sites to find coins. So sometimes looting is just barely scratching the surface, other times it's industrial. We'll talk about that in a moment. Cultural repositories are being destroyed. This is just one of many museums in the city of Aleppo in northern Syria. One of the biggest problems we're dealing with right now in terms of impacts is ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other groups looting museums and the storehouses of archaeological excavations, where the antiquities are right there, crated up, ready to go to the market. They're also excavating archaeological mounds. They're removing sculptures from standing remains. But one of the things that's hard for us to track is what they're doing inside of museums. Just this last week, a major museum in the city of Idlib in Syria was taken over by Islamist rebels, and everything went dark. We have no sources as to what's happened to the collections. Thousands of antiquities are now at the fingertips of Islamist rebels. Tunnel bombing, something that I now sort of specialize in studying. In certain urban areas in Syria where there's a military stalemate, where the Assad's forces in the city of Aleppo are here, and you have the rebels over on this side. So this is a typical urban environment in the war. Aleppo is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Very big city. It's the second capital of Syria. This is the downtown area. You're looking at the medieval citadel, that mound there. That's an archaeological tell that dates back to at least 5000 BC, on top of which there is an anti-crusader fortress from the 12th, 13th centuries. Down below that, you're looking at, in this lower area, a fragment of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, ancient city of Aleppo, that has incredible architectural remains from about the 13th century on up, AD. A stalemate ensued here in 2012 where Assad's forces were confined to the western side and southern side of the citadel. It represents high ground, so it's useful for artillery positions and snipers. The opposition forces have this area. Assad's forces were using barrel bombs to attack the opposition neighborhoods. They fly helicopters over neighborhoods, they find targets, and they kick 55-gallon oil drums filled with explosives out of the helicopter. After lighting the fuse on this thing, it's packed with explosives or incendiaries, smashes through the roof of a building and then goes off, takes the entire building out, makes a huge crater. They purposely target buildings filled with civilians. This is the Syrian regime, the Assad government. They target mosques, they target heritage sites with these barrel bombs. So in retaliation, rebel forces and Islamist extremists are digging long tunnels through the archaeological deposits of the UNESCO World Heritage Site underneath historic buildings here. Big historic buildings from the 13th, 14th century. They then dig a chamber underneath the historic mosque in this case. This is a madrasa or Islamic school that dated to the 14th century, is now a giant crater. They dig a chamber underneath of it. They wait until the building is filled with Assad soldiers, then they pack it with 50 or 60 tons of fertilizer used in agriculture, put some explosives in that, and then they light the fuse and they run. They film these explosions from afar, so it's a performative destruction. And then it takes out about a half a city block. The entire building is destroyed this way. Sometimes 10, 20 regime soldiers die at the same time. So it's a performative type of destruction that's done in retaliation for the barrel bombing in the city. Because of this deadly cycle of barrel bombing and tunnel bombing, huge sections of the UNESCO World Heritage Site are completely destroyed. We have the toxic effect of all that fertilizer being ignited, and the archaeological deposits for 10 or 15 meters down have been annihilated as well. People's houses in neighboring areas obviously also destroyed. This is one small section, so we're looking at the main entrance of the citadel from the south here, looking across this area towards the entrance of the anti-crusader fortress. And that's what Aleppo looks like. In other areas, archaeological mounds. In Syria, there are thousands of archaeological mounds, or tells. Earthen mounds. We see looting on a large scale. People, mostly local villagers, going out and excavating archaeological sites because no one's there to protect them. But we've also linked this activity of local villagers excavating these mounds to extremists. Everybody's looting in Syria, not just ISIL. Extremists are looting, the regime is looting, the opposition's looting, but the way it works is the political factions, the main belligerents, hire people to loot. They don't go out and do it themselves, or they tax the proceeds from the looting. This is a large source of revenue for ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, and the Assad regime. Looting is closely associated with the militarization of mounds. This is a mound at the top right there that's been militarized by the Assad regime. And while its soldiers were stationed on the site, the lower mound around it was heavily looted. We don't know exactly by whom, but the site was under Syrian regime control when this looting occurred. So the militarization of the high mound has done all sorts of damage for the military trenches and rifle pits, and then the lower mound has been heavily looted too. For archaeological purposes, it's been looted. Low mounds tend to be what's looted. High mounds are hard to loot because you find very few antiquities per cubic meter of earth that you remove. So throughout Syria, these low mounds are being looted. They have certain types of antiquities, and low mounds have certain time periods. So the looting is very selective. It's designed to get the maximum number of antiquities for the minimum amount of work, and the sites that are being targeted tend to be from classical antiquity. They want antiquities from the Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine era because they're the easiest to market. For example, this is the ancient Hellenistic and Roman city of Apamea, known for its major colonnaded street, which is shown in that lower satellite image and in the upper satellite image. It's a spectacular archaeological site. I used to give tours here. When the site was occupied by Assad's forces in 2012, this is what happened. Each of these little black dots is a 2 by 3 meter hole that goes down a couple of meters. The entire Hellenistic Roman city has been looted almost into oblivion in a period of about 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months. I wish I could say that this was rare in Syria, but this industrial looting is spreading really rapidly as a way to fund extremist activities and also for even the regime to make money. This is not all about ISIL. This is a site that was controlled by ISIL. This is a famous city of Mari, big archaeological mound excavated by the French starting in the early 20th century. If you know Mesopotamian archaeology, Mari is most famous for its Middle Bronze Age palace from the 18th century BC. Its prince was named Zimri Lim, and his palace was so famous that people from all over the eastern Mediterranean traveled to see his palace on the banks of the Euphrates River. His dynasty came to an end when the great king of Babylon, Hammurabi, traveled to the city, conquered it, and burned it to the ground. French excavators later found the well-preserved palace filled with artifacts and an entire archive of cuneiform tablets that describe Zimri Lim and his family and the events of Hammurabi's attack. Incredibly rich archaeological site known for its sculpture. What you see here in red is all of the looting that's happened since the beginning of the conflict. Immediately in 2012, with the start of the Syrian civil war, looting started at Mari. It was probably done by locals. When ISIL expanded into the area later, though, the looting got to be much more intense and spread out. Lo and behold, in southern Turkey, we're seeing Mari-style sculptures on the market now, being sold. ISIL is probably paying for the looting. They're taking the antiquities and selling them, or they're taxing the proceeds from the looting. This is actually a fairly old image of Mari. I'm sure it's been much more heavily looted now. The Roman Byzantine period city of Dura Europos. You can see the Roman city plan, the grid of streets from the Roman era. Famous for its early churches, one of the best preserved early synagogues, churches, synagogues, and pagan temples all side by side in the same multi-ethnic, multi-religious city from antiquity. It was eventually destroyed by an army from Persia, from Iran. So it had incredible preservation because of this destruction. The site was excavated by Yale, by German teams, by a number of different expeditions, and it has been almost completely looted away. Again, you can see in that little expanded window up there, almost the entire site's been looted, mostly while it's been under the control of Islamic State. And we are seeing, as you'll see soon, antiquities that certainly come from this site. So why is this looting so bad? It's different than, there's always been looting in Syria. In Iraq, we didn't see pre-conflict looting. In Syria, there was pre-conflict looting. But what's changed now is they're using metal detectors to loot sites all over Syria. They're using bulldozers, earth excavators to loot sites. This is the site of Ebla, a really famous archaeological site in Syria from the early Bronze Age. And it was bulldozed while it was being militarized by the Syrian regime, and now it's being used as of this week as a training camp for opposition soldiers. The soldiers probably in their spare time go out and they loot. And what we're seeing on the market, so over the last couple of weeks, what am I seeing from our in-country sources? Lots and lots of coins from metal detecting. Maybe these are coins that are being sold from people's private collections, but there are coins cropping up all over the market in Lebanon, Jordan, and particularly southern Turkey. And the coins are cropping up and the antiquities are cropping up in major port cities. And in Turkey, for example, the cities where we see illegal antiquities from Syria into Iraq, we are the cities that are also primary centers for people smuggling for ISIL to get fighters into Syria, into Iraq, and they're important port cities for arms smuggling. So arms and people are coming into the conflict, and things like antiquities and illegal oil are going out. Same transnational crime networks, same routes. All right? It's just another illegal activity, and it's incredibly lucrative. A barrel of oil right now goes for $20 or $30. U.S. coalition airstrikes are targeting oil tankers and refineries, and they're trying to take out oil capacity from ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra. How do you target this? A person can walk across the border with a Mari sculpture worth $30,000 to $50,000 in their pocket. That's a lot of barrels of oil, and you're assured a sale when you get it to the other side, where you meet with Turkish gangsters who have been working in antiquities sales for decades. Or ISIL can deal directly using the internet, and we know that they're doing direct deals that take out the middlemen. And they deal directly with buyers in places like Europe and probably North America. There's this new sort of direct dealing of antiquities that we're trying to document. We see hordes of artifacts like this in shops throughout southern Turkey. At major border crossings like Tel Abyad, Gaziantep, on the Syria-Turkish side, these border crossings are controlled by Islamic State, and as you see it in the news, they fight like hell to control these border crossings because it's where they make all of their money. Coins from metal detecting, Byzantine crosses and jewelry. This is the sort of stuff that those guys with metal detectors would be finding really rapidly on classical period sites. Again, remember there's a focus on looting classical period remains. Classical period sculptures, large numbers of them, just the last month. Almost everything we see is real. I'll show you some fakes here in a second. Palmyrene funerary sculptures from the oasis city of Palmyra in Syria, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Lebanon, in Turkey, Palmyrene funerary sculptures, something I study, are cropping up everywhere. These sculptures in this picture come from the Palmyra Site Museum and from tombs at the site of Palmyra that you could have taken a tour of in 2010. Actually, I saw these sculptures on a tour that I was guiding in 2010. And they just happened now to be in someone's living room in Turkey, and they were on their way either probably to Cyprus or Portugal, and they were on the market. Just 2 days ago, I got a photograph from some of my sources in Turkey, and they had this plaque from the Sumerian era in a computer bag. And they asked me, is this real? And I said, yes, this is very real. It has a Sumerian inscription on it from the late 3rd millennium. And this plaque would have been mounted to a temple wall in ancient Mesopotamia, and there would have been a nail holding it. And it essentially commemorates the gift of objects from the king of a city to the main gods of the city. It's a commemorative plaque, highly marketable. Unfortunately, it was broken recently. You see a votive sculpture. That votive sculpture from ancient Sumer would have been set up sometime around 3000 BC in a temple, and it represented a worshiper who wanted a likeness of themselves in front of the cult statue so that they could worship to the god perpetually. And you see coins and jewelry off to the side. I don't often do dollar values, but I get questions about dollar values all the time. The problem with trying to determine the value of this trade is that there are too many algebraic unknowns. I don't know what, let's say, Jabhat al-Nusra got for smuggling this across the border. I don't know what they paid for these objects from the local looters. What I can tell you, though, is that this is from southern Iraq. Actually, Shia-controlled southern Iraq, and it's puzzling that it's now for sale in southern Turkey. It's not from ISIL-controlled territory. It's from Iraqi-controlled territory. If you were to look at legal sales of antiquities like this, I think you would be shocked at the sale price for just this one plaque. Also for sale with this plaque is a tetradrachm of Philip III of Macedon, and one of the most collectible coins out there, an Athenian decadrachm. It's likely fake, warning, that was thrown in with this. That coin right there, there are only 30 others like it known in the numismatic world, and the last one I saw sold for $350,000. But based on the green patina on this coin, it is almost certainly a fake that has been salted in with all of the antiquities that are going to the Turkish market. The plaque I showed you, that's legitimate. We've read the inscription on it. We have a pretty good idea where it's from. And this is the sort of stuff we're seeing on a weekly basis. Now remember, there are also people out there who will tell you that these antiquities, this isn't happening, and that, or the extremists aren't making any money off of this. Yeah, they are. Our in-country sources tell us that they're taxing this trade. They're paying for people to go out and loot these sites. They make money at both ends of the antiquities trade. And it's pretty naive to think that they're not making money off of it. And because of that, the United Nations recently passed a UN Security Council resolution to crack down on this that I'm happy to say passed February 12th. This is binding for member states. Now the United States and other groups in the United Nations have to come up with new legislation to prevent the sale of blood antiquities within their borders and to crack down on trafficking, and the United States is now doing that. We have a couple of bills coming through the 114th Congress that are designed to prevent these blood antiquities from entering the United States, but they are, of course, already showing up. But things are being done, and we are fighting all of this. I'll cut this a little bit short. I mean, there's not a lot of silver linings. I give this talk pretty much on a weekly basis. The situation's really bad. And that's what I want people to understand, is the situation is really bad. What you see in the news media is just a tiny, tiny part of what's happening in Iraq and Syria, and it's spreading. You'll see that there have been attacks in Libya, attacks in Egypt, attacks in Sinai, southern Turkey, very fragile region. This is spreading. And what's spreading it, from my perspective, is this jihadi Salafi philosophy that ISIL, Boko Haram, Jabhat al-Nusra subscribe to. They actively justify the liquidation of material culture. They justify, through religious means, this war on cultural heritage. The Assad regime does their fair amount of damage. The Syrian opposition does damage, but they also have heritage experts who are trying to preserve the sites. The Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums, it's the Assad regime, but they're risking their lives to preserve these sites. The Syrian opposition, they're complicit in some of these cultural property crimes, but they have heritage experts who are trying to make a difference. ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other groups like them do this daily, and they do it on purpose, and that's what really makes this difficult. What you can do is volunteer your time, volunteer money, be better informed on what's happening. But the main takeaway for me frequently is to emphasize how much of the Islamic past is being destroyed. Yes, a lot of pre-Islamic material culture is under attack, but it's mostly right now, it's very much a war on Islam. And I think that that's what doesn't really shine through sometimes, or come through rather, in the media coverage in the United States and elsewhere. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Is this kind of practice, like tracking down these deals, but like webs, like people scanning the web continuously for threats and like viruses and all?
Right. So how do we know about all of this going on? At first, it was really difficult for us to find a lot of this reporting, but what we did eventually is we found the usernames of all of these ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra militants, and then we went out from there through social network analysis, pretty easy to do, and we were able to get all sorts of information from the fighters themselves, and then we have their publications. And then we also have in-country sources that send us a lot of ISIL literature, Jabhat al-Nusra literature. The challenge is YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, they've cracked down on ISIL accounts and Jabhat al-Nusra accounts, and they close their accounts down, and through good intentions, they're making our job harder to follow these militants, because they'll set up new accounts so they all got shut down, and then we have to find them. And it also makes me wonder how we look for security sources. I have a hard drive that's filled with all this stuff, and I'm regularly on a daily basis cruising sort of ISIL sites to see what they're doing. I must look pretty suspicious myself. But that's one of the ways we do it. It's just following that. It's not that hard to do, and the ISIL's pretty blatant about it, because they want you to read their posts. They want to troll people, right, and get you involved in the conversation. If you're really interested in seeing the damage they're doing, I don't recommend it, but look at their magazine, Davik. Okay, you can download it, but you've got to understand that it's filled with, it's one page of ISIL fighters handing out candy and bread to children in Raqqa, and the next page has an awful, awful atrocity. And they just interspersed it throughout the magazine that way. So I don't recommend you look at it. If you really want to see what they're doing, for example, they're very blatant about it. We also do some in-country rapid response surveys using cell phones. So we can get rapid information from places like Raqqa or Mosul to see what's happening in country. And oftentimes that helps us verify what's going on. Other questions? Or shall we?
I don't know, you have questions, or does anyone want to?
Questions for Andy?
Or Andy?
Yes, sir. I see a lot of it's being destroyed. As far as the stuff that's being sold, how much success has there been in recovering items, and what are the chances of restoring the historical context of the items?
Right. The first one, in terms of recovery, quite a bit's been recovered. Turkey is trying to do something about this. ICE agents in the United States, everybody's recovering material. We don't see a lot of it because the answer is usually it's ongoing investigations and they can't show us what they have, but they really do have. I have heard tales of rooms filled with material in crates like unto the first Indiana Jones movie. Not to like, but you remember that movie with all the crates? It looks like that in some places. It's not all from this conflict, but it's bad. And a lot of stuff's being recovered. The problem is once it gets past, let's, for example, the Syrian border, the time, effort, and money it takes to get that stuff back to its rightful place goes up exponentially. So we need to close the Turkish border, the Lebanese border, so that the material can't get out to lower, mitigate that problem. But once it's ripped out of an archaeological site, well, I mean, most of us are archaeologists, we understand how much information has been lost at that point. What I can say is that most of what I'm seeing on the market is coming from sites that have been looted industrially. So I've got another slide maybe in here. I might have taken it out, but I took that slide out. But in terms of who's doing the looting and what are we seeing on the market, everybody's looting, right? Just to emphasize that, it's another key point. The Kurds are looting, the opposition's looting. But the difference is ISIL is doing it at an industrial scale. And the material I'm seeing on the market comes from these industrial looted sites, and it's mostly from the classical era. And why is it from the classical era? Once it gets out of Syria, the dealers can say it comes from anywhere in the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa for the most part. They know what they're doing. And so they're telling the looters what to do, the dealers. And the dealers are in Turkey and Lebanon, and they're sitting there waiting for this stuff. And they're linked to organized crime, and organized crime, in turn, is linked to ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra. It's all one big network.
Thank you.
We'll start from
Isn't that cultural heritage destruction classified now as a war crime? And if so, then what is done in the countries that are on the kind of traffickers' way of exchanging artifacts or selling artifacts? Can those crimes be punished? Are there local? The Rome Convention has been ratified. Is anything happening in Turkey?
Yeah, I hear that things are happening in Turkey occasionally. I mean, more often than not, what I'm seeing is that until they've been able to crack down on the people trafficking and the arms dealing, we're probably not going to see much headway on the antiquities market. So when I'm looking at satellite imagery, what shows more than anything else for me on the Turkish border is that there are gaping holes in the border fence and people are just walking across the border still. And we get stories from our in-country sources that the Turkish border guards receive cell phone calls. They disappear for a couple hours from their posts, and whole convoys of trucks are driven from southern Turkey into Syria, into ISIL-controlled territory. That's still going on. And you've seen maybe after the Charlie Hebdo incident or with these schoolgirls from London, how easy it is for Westerners to travel to ISIL territory. Just last week, ISIL put out an English language document entitled How to Migrate to the Islamic State, which showed us exactly how you cross the border. And it matches up with satellite imagery. So until I see some headway with that, I won't really believe that the Turks are doing much with the antiquities trade coming the other direction. So it's a wide open border. Anybody can go through. I mean, we hear weekly reports of Westerners going to join ISIL and other people coming in. ISIL has no shortage of fighters coming in. So that's how I kind of see the situation now. The Turks are arresting people and they are confiscating antiquities. There have been big busts in Lebanon and in Jordan. But the problems there is that they're completely stretched to their capacity nationally, and Kurdistan as well, because they're dealing with the refugee crisis. They've got hundreds of thousands of Syrians and Iraqis who have fled those countries that they now have to feed, clothe, provide tents, and it's a really awful situation, and that's their number one priority, not the antiquities trade, and I understand that. So we need to do more to solve that humanitarian crisis.
Well, yeah, and my question kind of follow up on that, where, when we think about the crisis of looting, we tend to think about, who are the perpetrators, and it's the looters, and you mentioned the looters, and we think, oh, the middlemen, in this case. But, really, this, as we know, the supply, it's really the demand that creates the supply. And so I'm just wondering what efforts, in addition to the UN, legislation that's been passed, which of course UNESCO from 1970 has been somewhat effective,
right.
But we know that it's the demand sector that's really fueling it. So, and I think about, you mentioned Europe, you mentioned North America, and do they understand, do these buyers understand the dirty underbelly of these antiquities, more so than ever, than other maybe
right.
antiquities, if you can really
Yeah,
phrase them?
yeah.
Is there, what's your sense about, and have you had any contact with these buyers, and are you able
Oh,
to
have I had contact with
Yeah.
these buyers? If you
Just saying
do a
what-
search of my name
Yeah.
on Google, one of the first things that crops up is a vitriolic attack, ad hominem attack on me. Dante's inference. I made the mistake of saying that there was a connection between looting and terrorist financing, and I was attacked. I'm a very bad person. You go ahead and read it. My daughter got a kick out of it at 14. She read it and she said, "Dad, you're famous now. You have haters." And haters gotta hate. But the thing is, the people attacking me in the comments section are antiquities dealers, and they're lobbyists and coin collectors, very, very wealthy coin collectors. And they're masquerading as heritage experts and just well-informed, well-intentioned citizens. And I'm completely wrong. ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, they're not making any money off of this, and there's no connection, there's no such thing as blood antiquities. It's really frustrating. What's being done in the United States is our two bills. Representative Keating of Massachusetts has got a bill that's coming through that would really empower Homeland Security, FBI, to seize things as they're coming through. You think it would be easy to seize the antiquities coming through the border? No, not so easy. The people bringing antiquities in the United States just say they're replicas or they have accreditation papers that they're legal antiquities. In 2013, there was a 160-some% increase in legal antiquities imports from Syria into the United States, and there was a 660% increase in legal antiquities imports from Iraq into the United States. You tell me all those antiquities are legal. And those are only the ones that people have filled out paperwork for. So the antiquities come out of the conflict zone, they stop off someplace in between, and very practiced forgers say, collected in the 1890s by an old European family. They write up a history for it, and then the buyers get it there, and then they come in with these paperwork. It's, oh, these are from the EU. They've been there for generations. And that's a very easy way to do it. There are a lot of other ways I shouldn't probably be talking about, but or there's a stamp made in Syria on it, and the dealers or the buyers say it's a replica. And that's just the stuff that they're seeing at the airport. So they're making it easier to seize the stuff. They're making it easier to hold it there, and then get experts in to say, no, this is really recent, and it's from antiquity. It's not a replica. And it's going to raise the penalties as well. So Keating bill, and then there's a bill called Engel-Smith that would set up a international heritage czar attached to the White House, and they're going to try to coordinate all international heritage work in the United States so that we're all on the same page. Department of Defense, Department of State, and ASOR project, everybody will be working together in international heritage, which we hope would help to crack down on this, and will also help us with our cultural diplomacy in the United States. We get beat hands down in cultural diplomacy by Italy and France because they have ministries of culture. We don't have that in the United States. So we're hoping that that'll help with the cultural diplomacy end of it, and we can maybe exert a little more soft power in the conflict zone. Andy?
I want to highlight something from your question. I really appreciate that. Professor Dante's already mentioned this. I think twice he's used the term blood antiquities, which reminds you of something else, I would think. Blood diamonds. We're starting to intentionally use this term. And I think there are parallels that good-intentioned people wanted to buy diamonds because a spouse or a loved one or someone would have liked to have a nice piece of jewelry. And we're removed from Sierra Leone and other places where these gems were found. And we don't realize that with our good intentions that we fund something else. I think, so let's assume that most of the people wanting to collect these items have good intentions. But this is really where you can play a role. Because I think you as students can let people know, you can start publicity campaigns, and I think a grassroots movement is really what we need here to turn the tide so that well-intentioned people are not collecting antiquities. And I think you're right, if the demand goes down, a lot of the looting would go down. one of the things, Professor Dante's heard me say this before, 4 or 5 years, and we're on a university campus, not the same types of sport environment here as some other schools. But I feel that 4 or 5 years ago, university chancellors missed a unique moment in time to take back Division I sports. The really horrific things that happened at Penn State and at Ohio State, I think had changed public opinion about Division I sports, where university chancellors had a chance and opportunity to change the way college sports were played. They didn't do it. I think they didn't do it because they were afraid. And well-intentioned collectors are really powerful. And I think this is our opportunity as students, as a scholarly community, to take the chance and to try to show people what the real damage is being done here. I don't know that we can be successful, but I would hate for people to look back at us 5 years from now and say they didn't do it because they were afraid. So that's my appeal to you as students to do something, because I think you can make a real difference here, and that's what we're wanting to do as well.